Hola, cage fighting connoisseurs. This is KidNativeBloodyElbow.com coming to you live from the MMA Bunker. The doors are locked, the blinds are drawn, the blender light is on, semi-automatic close at hand, paranoia levels high. And so, we're talking about Chael Sonnen versus Tito Ortiz, Bellator Fighting Championships. Does this fight mean anything? Depends what meaning means to you. Does it have any sporting significance? Not really. Neither of these guys have been relevant in a long time. They're not really in the same weight division at their peaks. But it's a big win for Bellator, just putting on this fight, because survival is victory for Scott Coker and his guerrilla army at Bellator Fighting Championships, as long as Coker can keep Bellator on Spike. And since Spike owns Bellator, shouldn't be hard. It's just a matter of keeping it viable, delivering the ratings that Spike needs to keep paying for the fights. Chael Sonnen and Tito Ortiz promises to do that. Why? Two things. Because, one, Chael Sonnen has the gift of gab. Whatever it is, Chael Sonnen has it. The dude is entertaining. He's always saying some ridiculous shit that makes you want to watch him get punched in the face. That's the secret of Chael Sonnen. Tito Ortiz also has that kind of charisma, always has, even despite himself. Even when people are laughing at Tito, they're watching Tito. Tito's had 16, 17, 18, 20-year career at this point. At the top of the sport in terms of ratings and draw most of that time, even though he's long past his championship UFC days. And most of his second run in the UFC was mediocre results at best, but people are always fascinated with Tito for whatever reason. The malapropisms, stepping on his own dick, just the love-hate of Tito, the laugh at, the laugh with thing with Tito Ortiz. I mean, the guy's a remarkable fighter, remarkable personality. And Tito versus Chael, it's just magic. You care about both fighters. Both fighters are entertaining. Chael Sonnen just owns him in the pre-fight build-up. But Tito's never really been a words man. Not that he's always been a proof it in the cage man, but, you know, you don't expect Tito to win the battle of words with Chael. You expect him to embarrass himself and dig it deeper, and that's what he's doing, and it's great. And the thing is, all Coker has to do is stay on the air, because time is his friend. The longer he can keep Bellator delivering ratings for Spike, the more disgruntled UFC fighters he can sign, the more Rory McDonald's, the more Benson Hendersons, and he can slowly build his roster, recruit new talent, develop new talent, build relationships, swap talent with Ryzen in Japan. The longer he survives, the more he wins. And with all the disgruntlement in the UFC, with people talking about starting fighters associations, the ill-fated AAA, former Bellator boss Bjorn Rebbe organized, which seems to have gone down in flames. But there's also the MMA FA, which is affiliated with the class action lawsuit against the UFC. These things indicate a real level of fighter disgruntlement. These fighters are unhappy with the UFC. And as contracts expire, fighters are choosing, rather than renewing in advance, to fight out their contract and take the waiting period that the UFC's built in, on the off chance that they'll get a better offer from Bellator. And it's a quite likely chance, because, you know, if you're a middle-of-the-pack guy like Rory McDonald, not that he's not a top-tier fighter, but he's a middle-of-the-pack draw, the UFC has only a limited interest in you, but Bellator needs you desperately, because they need that credibility. They need the name recognition. They need fighters like Roy McDonald or Ben Henderson that might be on the downward side of their curve, but they're not too far past the peak. You know, the fight career peaks and then it goes down. And if that down spot can be just as rewarding as the up spot, the upslide. So there's money there. And the more that they can build these fighters, the more they can build, you know, match UFC veterans against new Bellator prospects, the more Bellator becomes legit in the eyes of the fans. Now, they're a long way from being anything competitive in terms of owning the dominant fighters in any one division or even a competitive division. I mean, everywhere you look, the Bellator division has to be assumed to be 5 to 10 ranks lower than the UFC division. But give it time. Give it time. And we saw with Eddie Alvarez coming over from Bellator and winning a title, MMA is relative. It's not absolute. There's not like the minor leagues and the major leagues. It's one fighter versus one fighter, and mano a mano, anything can happen. You know, you get two professional high-level athletes in a cage, one of them can win. You can't be just assuming just because somebody's in the UFC and somebody was in Bellator that the UFC guy's always going to be better. No, it's not like that at all. So I'm intrigued. The problem with this card, though, is that there's nobody on that card that's looking like star prospects. The only Bellator fighters I've seen that organically grown in Bellator that look like they have any potential of becoming stars, Michael Venom Page, but his last outing was a real fan killer. I mean, just going for 3 rounds of yuck because he was fighting somebody who was giving him trouble. I honestly think Venom would have been better off getting knocked out than putting on a boring fight. But that's neither here nor there. Then the Liam dude, the light heavyweight champ, he beat Tito, but he didn't really get any rub off of him. And why is that? And that's because he just doesn't have any personality. Then he went on to lose to Phil Davis, so he didn't have sporting relevance either. But it still builds. I mean, hundreds of thousands, a few million people saw him fight Tito, saw him beat Tito. So, over time that accrues. And I think one of the things that Bellator really needs to do that they haven't, and this is going to sound self-serving because, yeah, I run all of it. I run a bunch of MMA blogs. But the more Bellator can get the MMA media talking about their fighters, the bigger a win, because the hardcore fans are still the buzzmakers, and that's our audience. And so far, other than when they've had Tito and Chael, and this is one of the few times that UFC hasn't, tried to counter-program them. And sometimes it's actually, I think, worked against the interest of the UFC to put on, anytime Bellator would put on a major event, UFC would book something the same night. And that was, part of the Fertitas flood the market strategy. Whenever there's MMA, there's also going to be UFC, and see if you can compete. But sometimes that had the effect, like the night of Ortiz versus Bonner, that had the effect of putting the Bellator offering at the middle of the MMA conversation, because everybody was online, everybody was talking about MMA, and hey, Bellator's on too, let's talk about that. So, that's shows that's flood the market strategy has some limitations, and the biggest limitations is you're just stretching yourself so thin when you insist on putting up a fight card every time one of your competitors does. And WME seems to be pulling back from that. But at this point, the cupboards are so nearly bare. WME is really scraping to get headliners for their fight cards. They've got UFC 208, 209. These are not compelling headliners. And, we've seen with the Ronda Rousey-Amanda Nunes fight where they promoted it as if Rousey had no opponent, as if Nunes had no chance, even though Nunes was the champion going into the fight, and Nunes put a beating on her. I mean, Joe Rogan has gone off and gone on about how WME screwed that up. And so, you've got a situation where you've got Scott Coker, who's one of the cagiest veteran, proven MMA promoters in the game, going up against WME, who may or may not be letting Dana White have a big say. Dana White might be mentally checked out. Even if they're asking him what he thinks, he might not be focused because he's got all that, several $100 million and probably has an exit timeline. So, there's some questions. Joe Rogan and the gang on his show are wondering whether or not Dana White was involved in the decision-making behind the Rousey-Nunes promotion. We don't know. So what you've got is potentially a bunch of rookies from the entertainment industry going up against Scott Coker, who's a very proven, savvy MMA promoter who knows that it's about relationships. It's about the relationship with the fans, and he always delivers entertainment for the fans. And it's about the relationship with the fighters. And Coker, unlike Bjorn Rebney and unlike Dana White, tends to always have good relationship with fighters. Not always, not perfect. You know, Rampage Jackson has beefed about Bellator and his relationship there, but the reality is more fighters like Coker than dislike him, and you rarely hear Coker in the middle of any kind of controversy. Coker just does business, builds relationships. Over time, more and more fighters might want to work with Scott Coker rather than working with WME. I mean, you know, the fight game is a different thing. It's entertainment, but it's not Hollywood. And there's a certain humanity that you have to have in the fight promotion business. Even if you're Don King, you have to connect with fighters on a personal level that WME doesn't seem to want to do. And fighters notice this stuff and don't dig it. So advantage Coker there on the personality department. So we'll see. We'll see if this, you know, I predict that this Bellator card will do good ratings. You know, it doesn't have to do spectacular ratings, but just as good as they've been getting with Tito, which has been pretty darn good. And so, you know, that's pretty much all they have to do. I don't see any chance of this card building any stars, though. But you know, Paul Daly, not a star, but a well-known name. But he's as big as he's going to get. And Brennan Ward, maybe that kid has some potential, but it's, you know, with his record with domestic violence and everything else, I think he might have a ceiling, although maybe some people want to root against him. But I think Daly's probably going to win that fight anyway. So, you know, and there's Halleck Gracie, who's it's good to have a Gracie on the card. People care about Gracies. I mean, that's just the reality. And you know, I don't see Halleck becoming a big star, but you know, fans know the Gracie name. They know what to expect from a Gracie fight. So I think that should deliver, but I'm not seeing any breakout potential. A couple other things I want to cover while we're on the show. First off, Rizin. There's another veteran promoter out there. The dude that was behind Pride, and I'm blanking on his name. But he's the legendary Japanese promoter behind Pride, and he's behind the Rizin Fighting Championships, which put on a great show on New Year's Eve. And Nobuyuki Sakikibara. Now that's the man. He was the man behind Pride. Now he's the man behind Rizin. And keep an eye on him. He's going slow. He's not putting on too many events, but he's got a partnership with Spike TV. Leads to some cross-pollination and some great opportunities for just crazy nonsense, like this Gabby Garcia fight where they put Gabby Garcia in there against, you know, an elderly woman, basically. And it's, you know, it was ugly. It was a savage beating. And, Yumiko Hara. And, but people are watching it. It's on World Star Hip Hop. People are talking about it. And that Japan's lack of a fighting commission gives Rizin this ability to do crazy shit that will get attention around the world, and Bellator can send fighters back and forth. You saw King Mo participating in the Grand Prix, lost to Crow Cop, but that cross-pollination and that difference and that creates some intrigue and some excitement that I think long-term is an advantage for Bellator and the Rizin Alliance. So we'll see what they can build from there. But like I say, survival is victory for Scott Coker and Bellator. And Chael Sonnen and Tito Ortiz show every signs of delivering what Bellator needs, which is just eyeballs on TV. You know, people watching TV ads for Spike TV. That's the name of the game, and Chael versus Tito is going to deliver. Now, a couple other things I want to talk about. One, Tyron Woodley, a welterweight champ, is about to rematch Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, stirring up some controversy, alleging that he's being treated differently than other champions and promoted less because he's African American. It's not a winning PR strategy. African American athletes are in they have a Hobson's choice. They can't win for losing in this situation. They can either take it and not say anything, in which case, they're at a disadvantage, or if they try to speak up, then a huge swath of the audience is going to say, "Why are you playing the race card? This is nonsense. This isn't racist. So look at this guy. He's got all this money. I'd like to be discriminated against like that." Well, as Luke Thomas said on MMA Beat yesterday, every statistic points to African Americans being at a systematic disadvantage in America. So when an African American pipes up that they're being discriminated against, I think it behooves white America to listen, because we don't know from discrimination. African Americans do. So we should listen. At the same time, it's the fight game. Woodley could just be doing a heel turn, looking to piss off the fans. There's money in that, and if you're the fighter people love to hate, hey, they're loving to hate you all the way to the bank. And so, it's hard to parse all that out. But I think it's something he's got to do. He's got to be the squeaky wheel. I mean, everybody can't beat Demetrius Johnson. He doesn't know, there's no guarantee Woodley's going to be the champion for very long. I mean, he only drew Wonderboy Thompson the last time, and now they get to meet again. So somebody's going to go back to the drawing board and solve this puzzle. And it might be Thompson. Woodley might be done. So he needs to make some noise and be heard and draw a clearly delineated personality so people know who is Tyron Woodley. Well, he's the guy from Ferguson that's always talking about racial issues. Well, that's a brand, and there's plenty of fans who love that, and there's plenty of fans who are going to hate that, and that's the name of the game. Create interest. Make people care about you even if they don't like you. And that brings me to the fight that I wanted to talk about last week but didn't have time. It's the Tony Ferguson versus Khabib Nurmagomedov, a lightweight fight, UFC 209. I don't know if they're making an interim championship or what, but this is almost the perfect sporting match right now. I mean, these two guys are the hottest lightweights going in terms of what they've done in the cage and hardcore fan interest. These are the two most legit guys happening in the lightweight division, which is a huge division with Conor McGregor, the biggest star in the game, as the champion. So the stakes are high for this fight. The winner potentially could get a fight with Conor McGregor. And I'm just saying potentially. Normally you'd say would be expected to. But Conor McGregor is running off talking about fighting Floyd Mayweather. And he's got the UFC and Floyd Mayweather talking about it too. And that's obviously the bigger money fight than anything Ferguson and Khabib could do. Plus, it's much lower risk. Even if Mayweather knocks McGregor out in a boxing match, hey, it's a boxing match. He's an MMA fighter. What does he care? But for Ferguson and Khabib, this is a fight that a true fan is just dying to see, because you got the boxer wrestler in Ferguson who's just mean and vicious, has reeled off a string of impressive wins against Khabib, who's undefeated in the UFC, the best wrestler going in MMA right now, the Dagestani angle, and who's starting to show some personality. I'm liking his trash talk against Conor McGregor, and yet it doesn't have that it factor. There's no Sage and Page sprinkled on it. These are two burly dudes. One of them is very foreign to American audiences. One of them, Tony Ferguson's no white boy himself. He's not the kind of all-American, real America, Donald Trump's America, Sage Northcutt, white boy, blonde-haired, blue-eyed bullshit that the UFC and WME seem to like to push. Nonetheless, he's a legit badass, and that's ultimately what people want to see. So that fight shows you the lack of interest in that fight. I mean, the hardcore fans are all about it, but you're not seeing WME flexing their muscles, pushing that fight yet. They'll push it some, but it's not Sage and Page. It's not Conor McGregor. It's not Ronda Rousey. But if one of these guys can get in there, dominate, win, talk some shit, get some attention, get that Conor McGregor fight, and beat Conor McGregor, that person has the potential to become a big star. Not a Conor McGregor-sized superstar, but a big star, a GSP or Anderson Silva-style MMA star. Now, they'd need to beat Conor McGregor and then just keep beating people for a while, But combat sports fame accrues. And that's why you get fights like Chael Sonnen versus Tito Ortiz that aren't relevant in a sporting sense, because dudes are old. but they're relevant in a fan sense because fans are familiar with them. The familiarity builds over time, even though time mercilessly erodes fighting skills. So, the balancing act between spectacle and sport continues. And at this point in the MMA game, it is leaning heavy to the spectacle side. Heavy. The sports side is hurting. And part of that is ironically because the sport thing was pushed too hard for too long. And the way Joe Silva, longtime MMA UFC matchmaker, booked fights was just to throw the best guys in against the best guys with no real sense of drama or pacing. And that just caused talented contender after talented contender to just chew themselves up. I mean, when you've got a one loss record going, you're not building any momentum. And when there's so many fighters and so many cards, it's not like you had a self-contained league and you're watching the UFC once a month and there's only 20 or 30 guys and you get familiar with all of them and guys can climb the ranks. It's not like that. You get guys fighting the UFC, they'll fight 3 times and they're out. And the 3 guys they fought in the UFC fought 3 other guys who were never, they never broke in and fought anybody else that's known to the UFC audience. They fought 3 newbies each time they fought. It was some guy who's only going to be in the UFC for a year like them. And the net effect of that is you might as well have not fought at all. I mean, fighting on the UFC prelims against somebody else with no name value, it's just building nothing. And so hopefully WME will be able to square the circle and do a better job of building fighters, trimming the roster down to just the muscle, get rid of the fat, let people grow up in other organizations, and Bellator can keep growing. And because a competitive combat sportscape is a healthy combat sportscape. I think we've learned our lesson. Monopoly does not deliver all the fights you want. Handing Dana White and the Fertittas the keys to the kingdom did not deliver us an MMA paradise. So now we're back to the drawing board, and I think a competitive MMA business landscape is the healthiest. And so I'm actually optimistic. I've been pessimistic on MMA for a long time, but I think if we can make it through what looks like a downturn in 2017, the future's pretty bright. We're still on Bellator. We still got Bellator on Spike. We've got the UFC on Fox. We've got Rising coming back in Japan. We've got WME with all their heft and muscle and promotional know-how behind the UFC. $4.8 billion invested, so they're not going anywhere. They're going to stay in this game for a while. So that's the MMA Bunker for this week. I'll be back next week. We'll have a 6th round after Bellator on Saturday night. Eugene will have Knuckle Up on Sunday. So subscribe to MMA Nation. Nation.com on YouTube. Subscribe to MMA Nation on iTunes, and we fixed the problem. So if you're an iTunes guy, all the shows are back on iTunes. Follow me on Twitter @KeatonNate. Read me at bloodyelbow.com. And adios MMA aficionados. We'll see you next time.